Next season is going to be the start of one of the most exciting generational battles that we have ever seen in Formula 1 that, in essence, I think can be boiled down to two drivers at the complete opposite ends of the spectrum. Kimi Antonelli, who will be making his debut at 18 years old, racing on the same grid as Fernando Alonso at the age of 43. What I love is that whenever a young driver makes their debut, there is always a crazy Fernando Alonso longevity stat to go along with that. And with Antonelli, it's the fact that Fernando Alonso was already a world champion and on his way to winning his second and so far last world championship before Kimi was even born. In terms of the young generation of drivers who will generate the most anticipation ahead of next season, it has to be Ferrari's junior Ollie Bearman at Haas, and then especially Kimi Antonelli, given that he has been promoted straight into a race-winning team. Bearman definitely will have a more traditional route into Formula 1, not too dissimilar to Leclerc, who made his debut with Sauber in 2018 before being promoted to Ferrari in 2019. The difference with Bearman is that there is almost no way he's going to Ferrari after only 1 or even 2 years at Haas, because Ferrari themselves are only just going to start their partnership with Lewis, who has reportedly signed a 3-year deal at the Scuderia until 2027. That means that Bearman, unlike Leclerc, despite also being a Ferrari junior, will have to mentally set aside a short-term ambition of potentially getting into Ferrari quite quickly and focus entirely on establishing himself inside the team and trying to beat Esteban Ocon over the next 2 or 3 years. Bearman's Ferrari future will be dictated a lot by how the Lewis and Ferrari partnership plays out, but in the meantime, he has got to become one of the best drivers in the midfield, which means he has to be able to be Ocon in the next 2 or 3 years, and only then can he really make a case to be Hamilton's replacement. As for Antonelli, there is no point in sugarcoating the fact that the pressure on his shoulders is going to be immense. Depending on how competitive Mercedes will be, he might be expected to win a race in his rookie season, and due to the hype that he has generated with his rapid ascent through the junior formula, which has only been perpetuated more by Toto Wolff, he will be by far the most anticipated driver to watch in 2025. On top of that, he's also going to have to deal with what I've called the Mercedes driver triangle, because whilst he and George will want to be retained for 2026, Toto Wolff is also going to continue to try to sign Max in the background. And now, I've already done an in-depth video talking about this recently, which I'll link below, but what it means for Kimi is that there is the possibility, however remote, that if he has an underwhelming rookie season and is completely dominated by Russell, and then Max also becomes available, it can't totally be ruled out that Kimi could be dropped after only 1 year. And now, we'll cross that bridge if and when we get there, but the point is that making your debut for a top team which as a rookie comes with massive levels of scrutiny and expectation up against the absolute best drivers in Formula 1 is going to be a monumental challenge for Kimi. Compared to Bearman, just surviving his rookie season and potentially being able to show glimpses of his potential is going to be a massive achievement for Kimi. However, the reward of racing at the front is that compared to Bearman in the midfield, he'll be able to start building his reputation and make a bigger impression than anyone else right from the very start. The next generation of drivers are what I sometimes refer to as the DTS generation. And to clarify, I don't use that term in a derogatory sense, it's just that the rise of these drivers and their popularity coincided and was partly influenced by the rise of Drive to Survive. Now, to me this encompasses everyone who made their debut between Max in 2015 and Oscar in 2023. Now, whilst some might find it strange that I consider them as part of the same generation given that they made their debuts 8 years apart, keep in mind that Max is only 3 years older than Oscar, which isn't even as big of an age gap as there is between Lewis and Fernando. On top of that, Max is a total outlier. He is quite literally the youngest driver ever in the history of the sport, and so given how early he made his debut, he was always going to have overlap with the previous generation. What's a little bit unfortunate about these drivers so far is that, given that the last decade of Formula 1 has been dominated by just 2 drivers, outside of this season with McLaren, drivers like Leclerc, Russell and Sainz, who all have the potential to at least challenge for a championship, still haven't been given the car and opportunity to do so. Max and Red Bull's domination has kind of stalled the career of these drivers so far, and so whilst most of them have scored podiums, won races, and are clearly very talented having won championships in the junior formula, it still feels like we're yet to see how good some of these drivers really are until they are put in the same position that Lando and Oscar have been in this season. It's easy to say that everyone will eventually become world champion just because they've shown the potential to do so, but as we have seen, that is not how Formula 1 works. Some drivers, regardless of their talent, will never get the opportunity. Some drivers have to wait so long that eventually they are overtaken by the next generation before they even get the chance. And so I think the tantalizing question is, which one out of Leclerc, Sainz, Russell, Norris or Piastri is most likely to finish their career in the next 10 or so years without winning a world championship? The next generation are drivers that I have always called the in-between generation. These are the drivers that, apart from one, made all of their debuts in the V8 era in the early 2010s, and they include Hülkenberg, Perez, Ricciardo, Bottas, and Magnussen. Now, over time, these drivers are slowly being phased out for younger drivers, with Behrman replacing K-Mag being the prime example. Now, regardless of what you think about these drivers, the reason why they've had the longevity and relative success that they've had is because they are all very talented drivers in their own right, and apart from Hülkenberg, have all scored podiums, won races, and have established their place on the grid over the course of more than 10 years in Formula 1. However, just like the DTS generation who still have time to win championships, the in-between generation when they were in their prime were massively affected by the dominance of Lewis. In the end, we did get to see Bottas and Perez in championship winning cars, but we never got to see Ricciardo or Hülkenberg be given the same opportunities. The biggest asset that all of these drivers have right now is their experience, but up against the DTS and future generation of teenagers coming in, they are going to find it harder and harder to justify their place on the grid, even if they are able to beat their teammates. It's also quite interesting how all of these drivers now are in very different situations. Perez is still in a championship winning team but clearly isn't at the level of the drivers at the front. Hülkenberg since his return has almost been given a second lease of life and now is going to Audi. And Ricciardo, despite the fact that he was undoubtedly the best driver of his generation in his prime, is now in a position where he is struggling to justify his place on the grid and is preventing Liam Lawson from making his debut. Some of these drivers will definitely still be factors in the years to come because even into their 30s their ability and experience will keep them competitive. But I think that we can all see that with more and more seats going to younger drivers, the in-between generations time is coming to an end. The last generation is of course the champions of Lewis and Fernando who made their debuts in the 2000s, and even though there was quite a bit of time in between Fernando making his debut in 01 and Lewis making his debut in 07, when you look at their success and how their careers have intertwined all the way to the current era now, I think you have to consider them as being part of the same generation. Fernando and Lewis are competing in their 21st and 18th season respectively, and although we know that Fernando is the most experienced driver in the history of the sport when it comes to race starts, by the end of this season, Lewis will have also overtaken Kimi and they'll both be the most experienced drivers that we have ever seen. And now, yes, there are more races now, but almost 20 years at the highest level of motorsport is just incredible. And what still amazes me is that, as I've said consistently throughout my videos, to me, they are both still top 5 drivers on the grid. They are not still here based off reputation, they are not still here as a charity case, they are still in Formula 1 because even up against the DTS generation who are all in their prime, we saw last season when Fernando was fighting for podiums, and this season when the Mercedes has been capable of winning races. These guys are champions for a reason, and even now in the right machinery, I think both are still capable of winning championships. In the modern era, there have been drivers who have reached a similar number of seasons like Schumacher, Raikkonen and Barrichello, but none of them were even close to being as competitive as Lewis and Fernando are now, and that is why I think it's constantly important to remind people that especially with Fernando at the age of 43, what these two are doing and how good they still are is not normal. These guys are absolute freaks of nature who have not just stood the test of time, but are still thriving and outperforming some of the best drivers of the current generation. It's also worth noting that Lewis and Fernando are not going anywhere. The motivation and hunger that they still have to keep on competing is as high as any young driver that we have seen. Even before Aston Martin announced that Adrian Newey would be joining the team, Fernando Alonso signed a multi-year contract extension. And after finishing as the highest placed driver only behind the two dominant Red Bulls last season, Ferrari also signed Lewis Hamilton, meaning both of them are going to continue racing into the new generation of cars in 2026. I don't remember the last time that we had 4 different generations all racing against each other, and specifically 4 generations of incredibly competitive drivers who, for the most part, all still deserve their place on the grid. I mean, forget the fact that we'll have Antonelli, Verstappen and Hamilton at the front. Even at the back of the grid, we'll still have potentially drivers like Hülkenberg and Sainz battling it out. Of course, the cruel irony is that not all of these drivers will have the car to match their talent. But with the futures of drivers like Alonso, Hamilton, Verstappen and Leclerc all secured, and with drivers like Piastri, Behrman and Antonelli only getting better and better with more experience, the next few years of Formula 1 should be some of the best that we have ever seen. Well, there you have it. If you did enjoy this video and want to support the channel, then don't forget to subscribe, that would be massively appreciated, and I'll see you in the next one.